The following are the scenarios of election fraud that ordinary Korean people have uncovered on their own. The Democratic Party creates an election blueprint. From this blueprint, they run simulation software programmed on the National Election Commission server to inflate the vote count. The vote count is inflated through several methods such as manipulating electronic counting machines, inserting fake ballots, or switching ballot boxes. The Supreme Court covers up these crimes by nullifying the recount. Of course, this hypothesis cannot be confirmed until the investigative agency forensically examines the National Election Commission servers and computer equipment. However, we believe it is the most persuasive hypothesis after analyzing the evidence collected thus far by citizens in the field, and we will lay out this evidence that supports our hypothesis. Many people were shocked by the results of the 2020 Korean general election, where the Democratic Party won by a large margin despite the even polls. Under Korean election laws, a voter can decide between casting their votes on election day or during the 2-day early vote period. Many citizens suspect that setting aside 2 days for early voting sets the stage for bad actors to perpetrate election fraud. The morning after the 2020 election, a Democratic Party staff member and political strategist posted this on his social media account. A table showing the number 163, which he bragged was the Democratic Party's prediction of the number of seats they would obtain, which later we found was the exact number of seats, along with an exact match in breakdown by constituency. And look at the table's title, Early Vote Manipulation Value. People began to wonder, could it be, as this table suggests, that the early vote had been manipulated and served as a blueprint to the Democratic Party's plan to win the election? Evidence that the Democratic Party may have planned the election in advance also emerged in the most recent 2024 elections. In an article in the Donga Ilbo, the Democratic Party said it was aiming for an overall voter turnout of 71.3%, including 31.3% in early voting. But even more surprising is that the early voter turnout in the 2024 general election was 31.3%, exactly the same as the Democratic Party's prediction. Based on the opinion polls in each constituency, the predicted voter turnout and the manipulation value, the number of early votes is inflated and distributed to each constituency. And the National Election Commission announced these fake vote numbers, claiming they were the election results.
In the election day vote should be close to the early vote. It is a general rule of statistics. But my statistical analysis of the vote result of the 2020 general election gave me strong confidence that this election is fraudulent.
The blue bar representing the Democratic Party was entirely on the right side of zero, which means in every single constituency, they got more early votes than election day votes. The red Conservative Party, the exact opposite. Not only that, the graph is a mirror image with a 10% shift of votes in either direction. The other minor parties represented by the bars in the middle means their votes were not part of the manipulation.
It is 100% vote fraud, since when I calculated the possibility of this vote result, it turned out to be almost zero. The result of the 2020 general election reported by the NEC is not possible in a real-life election.
Professor Huss said the likelihood of achieving a result like this, with tens of millions of real-life voters, is equivalent to tossing 253 coins in the air and having them all turn up heads. This graph shows the results of the recent presidential election in which Lee Jae-myung was elected. Red shows the districts won by the conservative candidate Kim, and blue shows the districts won by Lee Jae-myung. In many cases, the conservative candidate won in the election day vote, but as you can see in the early vote, the results were overturned in favor of Lee Jae-myung. Had the early vote not been manipulated, this would have been virtually impossible to achieve. In the 2020 general election, many observers reported seeing the conservative candidate winning in the election day vote. But then the results reversed as early vote ballot boxes began to open late at night. You may remember the incident during the 2020 U.S. presidential election when Donald Trump was winning in all the swing states until midnight. But when the mail-in ballot boxes that arrived early the next morning were opened, a flood of votes for Biden poured in, overturning the election results and giving Biden a victory. A voter turnout of over 100% is clear evidence of rigging, as it was in many constituencies. And what is truly shocking is that the hourly voter turnout rate during early voting for this presidential election is exactly the same as the one for the 2022 presidential election 3 years ago. It is quite possible that the same computer program was used to manipulate the early voting this time as well. The question now is, how did they actually implement the vote fraud? The simulated results are manipulated at the counting site using electronic counting machines. These are hundreds of ballots from one constituency going through a counting machine. Ordinarily, the ballots should appear in random order. But you can see that they are all marked for the Democratic Party candidate. You may recall from these over 100 consecutive Democratic vote scans the so-called Biden spike, a strange phenomenon that occurred in Wisconsin and Michigan between 4 and 6 a.m. on November 4th, the day after the 2020 U.S. presidential election. When the vote counting, which had been halted around midnight, resumed, a sudden spike in Biden votes was observed. Of the over 100,000 votes counted at that time, more than 90% were for Biden, and similar phenomena that occurred in Korea and the U.S., which defy the basic laws of statistics, can only be explained by election fraud. According to the target votes inflated and manipulated by the NISI computers, fake paper ballots were made and inserted into the ballot boxes. Take a look at this counting clerk separating paper ballots that are stuck together. Why are they stuck together when each ballot is cast separately? The NEC gives a nonsense explanation that the ballots stuck together by static electricity. And this, bundles of votes that look like they just came out from the mint. How is that possible for votes that go through many hands? The NEC made the ridiculous excuse that the ballots were made of special paper that could be reverted to their original state, so voters folded the ballots and put them in the ballot box, which resulted in the stiff ballots. The National Election Commission's voting manual has a clause that says, cover all CCTVs if installed in the voting locations, which makes it impossible to check the number of early voters or any other illegal activity, such as multiple voting or proxy voting around the voting locations. 9 months before the 2020 general election, the head of the Democratic Party's research think tank, Yang Zhongchol, paid a 4-day visit to China, where he met with high-ranking members of the Chinese Communist Party and flew to Shenzhen to visit the world-famous tech company, Tencent. And not only that, an accountant named Roy Kim discovered the Chinese Communist Party's slogan, "Follow the Party," programmed and hidden in the ASCII code in the 2020 general election data announced by the NEC. He discovered the algorithm which the programmer used to plant these hidden codes in the NEC data. And the NEC doesn't just stop at manipulating votes, it also controls the opinion polls, which is used to convince the public to accept fraudulent election results. This QR code contains identifying codes for each voter. When the ballot goes through the electronic counting machine, the voter's personal information, as well as who that person voted for, is input into the NEC's computer database. Now the NEC has access to this information, which is unconstitutional, and then supplies this information to opinion poll companies, leading to suspicions that the NEC has been interfering with public opinion polls. Despite the fact that the overwhelming evidence of election fraud emerged in the recount, the Supreme Court justices dismissed the lawsuit without even properly verifying it. The responsibility for the collapse of democracy in South Korea lies largely with corrupt judges who are destroying the rule of law. The fraudulent election in South Korea is not just a domestic problem. It is a treason committed by South Korean leftists under the influence of North Korea and China. Furthermore, there are growing allegations that AWEB, which is funded by USAID, has been organizing election fraud in multiple countries worldwide. This organized crime of the global left seeks to undermine the alliance between South Korea, the United States, and other allies. We Koreans earnestly request that the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives take an interest in this issue and help restore South Korea's democratic integrity.